Are you ready to go over today's homework? We're going over Monday's homework. So you can take out your homework and follow along. Welcome to change your answers as you need to. I may not go over every single problem, but obviously the ones that I do, you can go over. Change your answers. Okay, so the first thing we have is to find the sum. Raise your hand, tell me, what is a sum? Yes, you are right. Think it in your head. Very good. A sum is the answer to an addition problem. So we have to add 3 and 785 thousandths, and we need to line up our decimals. That's the most important part, right? So when you do this, go ahead and put your decimal underneath. So we are adding 625 and 9/10. So in the number 625 and 9/10, you look and see, okay, here's my decimal. So on this side is my 5, so it goes here. On this side is my 9. Now you can work your way back. So then you need a 2 here, a 6 here, and you can fill in zeros here and here. Okay, so check the back of your work. Flip it over and see if you lined it up correctly. Then you can just add them all together, 7 and 9, because 10 plus 7 is 17, so 9 plus 7 would be 16. 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So we get 629 and 685 thousandths. Okay, let's do find the difference. So we've got 212 and 8/10 minus 65 and 7/10. So 8 minus 7 is 1, 2 minus 5, we won't have enough, so I need to borrow from my neighbor. So instead of 1, they've got 0, and instead of 2, I now have 12. So 12 minus 5 would be 7. 0 minus 6, can't do it, so we borrow. So instead of 2, I have 1, and instead of 0, I have 10. So now we can do 10 minus 6, so we think about what goes with 6 to make 10. And then 1 minus nothing. Our decimal goes in one straight line. Go ahead and say that decimal in your head, not out loud. 147 and 1/10. Okay, let's do the quotient one. So we're going to solve 7 into 857 and 6/10. Okay, so the first thing we do, let me write it over here. So the first thing we need to do is divide. So we say, how many times does 7 go into 8? Well, 7 times 1 is 7, so 1 time. 7 times 1 we just figured out was 7, gives us 1 left over. So we bring down our 5. How many times does 7 go into 15? Well, 7 times 1 is 7, 7 times 2 is 14. 14 is as close as you can get. So 7 times 2 was 14. Get 1 left over, bring down our 7. How many times does 7 go into 17? Well, we just figured out 7 times 2 is 14. That's as close as we can get. 14, I would just count up here. 15, 16, 17 would be 3. Now 7 into 36. 7 times 5 is 35. As close as we can get. I'm running out of room. Uh-oh. So we get 1 left over, but the directions today say to report your remainder as a decimal, which means we can't just put a remainder 1 here. So we need to add a 0, bring it down, divide again. 7 goes into 10 once, which would be 7. I'm just going to rewrite mine up here. I'm just moving that here, which would be 3 left over. Bring down a 0. Uh-oh. It's not going to end yet. 7 goes into 30 4 times because it's 28. Get 2 left over, bring down another 0. Uh-oh, I don't think this is ever going to end. 2 would be 2 times, which is 14. Yep. So this one's not going to end. So let's put our decimal straight up, and let's talk about what to do when it keeps going like this, because it didn't end nice and beautiful. So what we need to do is we need to at least go to the thousandths place. So we didn't really need to do this last one, but I just wanted to see if it would end. So we go to the hundredths place, we make our decimal go into the thousandths place, which is right here, but we need to round it to the hundredths place because that's like a very normal place, right? We have money and other things that are in the hundreds. So we're going to round it to here. So we say, all right, I got a 1 in the hundreds place. I look next door. It's a 4, which means it's closer to rounding down, right? Because we've done that a lot. So our final answer would just be 122 and 51 hundredths because it doesn't round up to the next number. Okay? Cool. Let's do a hundredth less and a hundredth more. So the first one that we had was 5 and 83 hundredths, and we need to do a hundredth less and a hundredth more. So which number's in the hundredths place? Go ahead and think it in your head. Maybe underline it on your paper. Should be this 3 is in the hundredths place. So we think, what's 1/100th less than that? So you can even think of this as money. Think of a penny less. So we'd have 5 and 82 hundredths. And then think of a hundredth more. 5 and 84 hundredths, right? And then once we have 3 in a row, it really works like a number line. 5 and 82 hundredths, 5 and 83 hundredths, 5 and 84 hundredths. Pretty simple. Okay, let's do the next one. We've got 92 and 7/10. So we don't have a hundredths place here, which makes it a little bit trickier. Do you remember what we can do if we do not have a number in that place? We can just add a 0, right? Because it doesn't have a value, so add a 0. So now we do have a hundredths place. So here we have to say, well, what's less than 0 hundredths? But that's kind of confusing because there's not really anything less than 0. But that doesn't just say 0 hundredths, it says 70 hundredths, right? So what's 1/100th less than 70 hundredths? Or if we're thinking about money, what's 1 penny less, because that's what we're doing, right, is a penny. What's 1 penny less than $92.70? Would be $92.69, because 69 hundredths would come right before 70 hundredths. And so then 1/100th more should be easy, right? 69 cents, 70 cents, so 92 and 71 hundredths. Okay, and then finally we have 392 thousandths. You need to think of a hundredth more and a hundredth less. Let's do less first. So first we got to find the hundredths place. Go ahead and underline it if you haven't. So we think, what's 1/100th less than what I currently have? So instead of 392, it's 1 less, so 382 thousandths. And then 1/100th more, well, remember what's 1/100th more than 9? 10, but we can't just squeeze a 10 in there, right? So this is where you can think of it as 39 hundredths and go up to the next hundredth after that. So 1/100th more would be 402 thousandths. And if you weren't sure about that, you could add on a hundredth like so. Carry that, and you get 402 thousandths. Okay? Let's go on to the next thing. Next, we need to look at those decimals. We did the first one on the board today, the one on this side of the square. Someone told me there were 53 squares shaded, if you remember, but we're supposed to show the decimal, so it's 53 out of 100 possible squares. So we would say this fraction 53 hundredths, and so we would write a decimal that sounds just like that as 53 hundredths, right? That's how we'd say it, 53 hundredths. So that one's easy. And then the other one, let's see how many squares are there. 10, 20, 79 out of 100 squares. So it works the same way. It says 79 hundredths, so the decimal would be 79 hundredths. So you're not writing this, you're writing these as your answers. Okay, measuring to the nearest half of a centimeter. I said this to some classes, but I don't know if I said to everybody that just because you're measuring to the nearest half centimeter doesn't mean that it can't be a whole centimeter. It just could also be a half centimeter. So if I can just kind of zoom in on that line, it looks to me like it is between 5 and 6, but maybe not quite to this halfway mark. But I would still say it's closest to the halfway mark. So I would call this one 5.5 centimeters. Does anyone know another way you could write 5.5 centimeters? You could write 5.5 centimeters. Either of these are okay. And then the second line, let's see. The second line is, looks like it's just barely past 2. Like maybe like that. So I really don't think it's closer to half than it is to the whole number. So I would just call this one 2 centimeters. Because even though it says you're supposed to measure to the nearest half centimeter, this is a half a centimeter, half a centimeter, half a centimeter, right? Between each whole centimeter is a half, but then the whole number is also a half, if that makes sense. Okay, and then finally we need to look at area and perimeter. So we talked about this today. Our rectangle looks like this. We had 6 centimeters and 11 centimeters. So if we want to find the area, it's the whole inside. It's like how I said that if I wanted to buy a new bulletin board, paper, or fabric or whatever to cover the background, I would need to find the area. Area is solved by doing length times width because it works like an array. An area is like the word array, area, array, right? Very similar. Because I could make an array for 6 by 11. Remember we did arrays like way at the beginning of the year? So an array that's 6 by 11 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then 11 this way, remember? So I didn't space it out very well. I should have like filled this whole thing in, but I didn't because I was just trying to figure it out. So I did a 6 by 11 array, covered the whole area, right? It's like filled in. So that's the same thing as doing 6 times 11, right? Because an array shows multiplication. So what would the area of this shape be? 6 times 11 is 66, and then we need to use our unit. So our unit for area is in centimeters squared. It's really important that you put this squared because we multiplied 6 times 11, and we also multiplied centimeters times centimeters. And remember from when we did square numbers and stuff, when you multiply like the same number times itself, it's 3 squared or whatever it is squared. So it's centimeters squared because we multiplied the centimeters times the centimeters. There's some other reasons we'll talk about in a little bit. Okay, and then we need to find the perimeter. The perimeter is the distance around the outside of a shape. Like if I was doing my bulletin board and I wanted new borders, I would have to find the perimeter. So I do the perimeter by adding all the sides. So this is a little bit confusing because you can't just add 6 and 11 because that's not all the sides. That's only 2 of the sides, right? So you have to add all the sides. So we talked about this today, but you guys told me that this one was 11. Opposite sides are the same. You totally get that, which is awesome. So all I have to do is add those together. I always add the like sides at once. 11 and 11 would be 21. 22, oh my gosh, duh. 11 and 11 would be 22, plus 6 and 6 would be 12. So you just have to add those together. You get 34. And our unit here is just centimeters because we didn't multiply, so we didn't do centimeters times centimeters, we just added the same thing up. So perimeter, we would need one long thing, whereas area is different. It's like a square. So that's why it's centimeters squared, just because it makes a square. But this, even though it's in the shape of a square, if we undid it all, it would make one long line, right? It would be 6 plus 11 plus 6 plus 11 in one long line. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense to you and you'll be able to do your homework tonight with no problem. And